The wonderful and familiar story of the Epiphany and the three wise men is so rich in meaning, far beyond and deeper than the story we hear. Magi from the east arrived in Jerusalem. Notice that the text does not name them kings, but simply Magi. Some translations speak of them as astrologers, as they are led by a star. So, how is it that they became known as kings and wise men? You know, we three kings of Orient are. The first hearers of Matthew's Gospel were Jews of Jerusalem who had come to follow the new way of Jesus. Thus, they would have been familiar with the wisdom literature of their own scriptures. In the first book of Kings, Solomon asks God for the gift of wisdom. And from that time, wisdom was thought to be a gift given to kings. What was the wisdom of the Magi? That they were seeking the Christ. How wise. Furthermore, Matthew says they are from the east, perhaps describing the truth that the Christ was born for all humankind, and not only for Jews. By the time of the writing of the Gospel, Paul had been on his missionary journeys and was welcoming Gentiles or non-Jews to the faith. May we who celebrate this feast today be given the gift of wisdom to always be seeking the Christ. And may we experience a unity with all people and with all who call themselves Christian, regardless of denomination or worship tradition. We saw his star at its rising. Perhaps the first hearers of this story remembered their ancestors of the Exodus, who were led through the desert by the light in the clouds. What and who are the stars that guide us, that lend direction to the journeys of our lives? This same star that guided the Magi to Jerusalem will also lead them to the place where the child was. King Herod assembled the chief priests and scribes, inquiring of them where the Christ was to be born. Interesting, isn't it, that Herod assembled the religious leaders of the time to ask about the birth of Christ. They knew it was in Bethlehem of Judea, as they quoted the prophet Isaiah. Although they could respond this way, they never came to accept Jesus as the Christ. What about us? Does our knowledge lead us to believe? They were overjoyed, and on entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother. They were overjoyed. How do we respond upon every revelation of the Christ to us? May we experience great joy, the same joy that Luke's Gospel speaks about in the meeting of Mary and Elizabeth. Luke says that the babe in Elizabeth's womb leapt for joy. Let us let go of any of our adult resistance and express the joy that erupts in children. Unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the reign of God. they prostrated themselves and did him homage. Obviously, this is a gesture of respect and admiration given to a king. The Magi recognized the God incarnate in the infant. How and where do we recognize the presence of Christ? We don't use the same gesture, but it is worth pondering how we show respect and admiration to our own encounter with our Christ. They opened their treasures and offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. In every souvenir shop throughout Israel, there is a little package of 3 little bottles of gold, frankincense, and myrrh, still available today. Many have undertaken to explain the symbolism of these gifts. However, I once heard a fine homilist say that if the Magi were indeed magicians of a sort, they perhaps used these 3 items in performing acts of illusion. So, in finding the truth of the Christ, they surrendered their tools of illusion to cling to the truth. What might we be invited to surrender in order to cling to the truth of our Christ? Having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed for their country by another way. Now, when we experience a significant life event, one that changes us, even familiar ways look different and new. Whether or not the Magi went home by a different route, they had been changed. Their way looked different because they themselves were different. May we be open to being transformed by every encounter we have with our God in Christ.